Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share some Wildflower collections card. This is using the new Lisa Horton Crafts Wildflowers collection with Spellbinders. First, we have the Splatters BetterPress plate. Then we have the Script BetterPress plate. I absolutely love this. Perfect for just a simple background. And then we have the Butterfly Silhouette BetterPress registration. This might be my new favorite registration press plate set. Then we have the layered Gladiolas die set with lots of little flowers to cut out and layer together. Then the layered Wildflowers die set. This one creates 3 different wildflowers. We have the scalloped and stitched edge ovals, perfect for adding different layers to cards. And you can see how that size compares to a piece of A2 cardstock. So it's perfect for the front of an A2 card. We have the Very Best Wishes Sentiments stamp and die set. I love when Lisa does this, doing a main sentiment with some sub-sentiment stamps. Then we have the Sending Smile Sentiments stamp and die set as well. So I'm going to start off with using the BetterPress plates, but I'm going to start off with using them with my Glimmer system. I have it warming up here, and I'm going to be using some Aura foil. This is a beautiful gold foil that has a holographic shine to it, so it catches other colors, which makes it perfect for pairing with different colors. So it's going to be perfect for both the butterflies as well as the wildflowers. So I have my pieces cut. I'm working on some Hammermill cardstock here. I'm going to use the Script press plate first, placing it on my hot Glimmer system with the textured side up, the foil with the pretty side down, and then my Hammermill cardstock on top. I press the timer button for my Glimmer system, and once that stops blinking, I can put it through my Platinum 6 machine. You need both the heat as well as the pressure for doing hot foiling. And look at that perfect little background for many different cards. I think I can go with many different themes. I'm also going to foil my butterflies. Now, even though this is a BetterPress registration press plate set, I wanted to try out foiling them and then using the solid press plate for coloring them. So I'm foiling them first, same layering, same everything as regular foiling. I have the press plates there, put my foil with the printed or the pretty side down, Hammermill cardstock on top, press the timer button, and once that's done, run it through my Platinum 6 machine. Now, anytime I do foiling, I also like to do solid hot foiling. Might as well use up that excess foil while we have it and while we have the Glimmer machine done. I love the gorgeous foiled butterflies. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. So once that's done, and yes, I am touching hot foil plates. They are hot. My Glimmer system came with a magnet piece, and I rarely go and grab that magnet piece. But if you're sensitive to hot things, don't touch them. I do dishes many times a day in super hot water. So for me, it's not that big of a deal, but I would definitely not recommend it. You see me do it on videos, and I try to regularly mention that they are hot, so use caution. You know what your limits are. I just know that I can handle them, and I have my mat right beside my Glimmer system, so I'm not carrying them a long way. With my foiling done, I'm ready to do that solid hot foiling, and I'm using a solid hot foil plate to do that. Put my spare foil, the excess foil, the negative foil that is left over from doing the regular foiling, pretty side down, Hammermill cardstock on top, press that timer button, and once that timer button goes through, I put it through my Platinum 6 machine. So you can see that by doing this, you get double the foiling. You're not going to waste as much foiling. So it's a great way to reduce that waste. And sometimes I don't use these solid hot foils for the front of cards. Sometimes I use them as pieces to die cut from, but I always save them. It's much easier to save that solid hot foiled piece on the cardstock rather than saving that negative foil to use later. So I'm going to do that for all my pieces here, both the Script regular foiled as well as the negative foiled are going to get used for different layers on cards. And I'm going to be using the butterflies, all 3 different butterflies. I'm going to make 3 different styles, the foiled, the negative foiled, and then I'm also going to use the butterfly registration press plate set in my BetterPress system. So once I have all these pieces done, I can set them to the side and I can cool off my Glimmer machine. Look at how gorgeous that turned out. Perfect for creating unique cards. And I love the fact that with the BetterPress system, you can use it, or with BetterPress plates, you can use it in the Glimmer system as well as your BetterPress system. So in order to match up my butterflies, and this is not a perfect system here. I put my piece on the clear plate of my BetterPress system. I placed those solid butterflies where those foiled butterflies were, flipped over my base, and carefully moved it so that those magnets connected without making those butterflies move on my paper. Then I pressed it down so that they would be magnetically attached to that base, flipped it over, and now I'm ready to start inking. So I'm going to use some interference inks with many different things in this video. I absolutely love using them. And I'm going to start off with using some black soot distress ink with an ink blending brush on the centers of the butterflies, or the parts of the butterflies closest to the body. Now, the reason I like to do this is because interference inks look different on white or light cardstock than they do on black or dark cardstock. And I love to play with those properties. So by putting that black down first, I can use one interference pad and get a different look with them. I can see both properties of that. So once I have that black soot done, I'm ready to use some Opal Blush interference ink, and I'm inking up that press plate. Now, the thing to be careful with these interference ink pads is they are foam pads. They're very, very soft. So when you press down, you're likely going to get some ink on the base of your BetterPress system. Use a damp cloth to wipe that off to try to not get anything transferred to the outside parts of your butterfly. You may have noticed while I was inking that my side profile butterfly actually moved, but because I'm using the interference pads and I could see exactly where I'd pressed the ink, it was easy to move it back in place. If I didn't have that ink on my base to be able to know exactly where to place it, what I would have done was take that butterfly off and reposition it the same way I did the first time to make sure that I had proper positioning. If I didn't have the ink on the bottom part or the base showing me exactly where the outline of that plate was, it would have been extremely difficult to know exactly how it was placed. So once I have my Opal Blush interference ink on my butterflies there, I'm going to use a dry paper towel and blot the ink off of the foiled part. I do this a couple times, and then I use my clean paper towel to clean it off in a circular motion. And you can see that I get a little bit of a blue halo around the butterflies. I knew that was likely going to happen. Even though I did my due diligence and blotted it off, there's still a little bit on that foil. That foil resists the ink, so it's also not going to dry on there. But best to try to wipe it off as much as possible blot it off as much as possible before wiping, to try to eliminate as much of the excess ink going outside your butterflies, as well as outside or going onto your fingers and then accidentally touching something else. So I'm matching up the dies that go with this set, taping them in place with some Best Ever craft tape, and then I'm going to die cut these pieces. I'm also going to die cut the solid hot foil pieces, but I'll do that off screen because the die cutting of each one of these is going to be exactly the same. I'm actually making 8 cards in this video, so this video is a long video in itself. So I did try to eliminate any repetition or the same process happening multiple times. And this collection would also pair really, really well with the spring collection that Lisa did with Spellbinders last year. She had a layered anemone, a layered iris, as well as some background like circle spotlight press plates and stuff like that. So these would be great to pair with those as well. I didn't do that in this video because once again, I was creating 8 cards. I knew it was going to be a long video, and by pairing it with those other things, it would have been even longer. But there's a good chance at some point in the future that I will pair them together because I think they'd make fabulous pairings. So once my foiling is done and die cutting those foiled images are done, I'm ready to use that Butterfly Silhouettes registration press plate in my BetterPress system. So registration press plates come with a clear template. It shows you exactly where to place those press plates for positioning them perfectly as intended. I do like to tape that piece in place just to make sure it's not going to shift on me. One thing to note is because of that little piece of acetate, sometimes smaller press plates move a little bit easier and don't stay in place. So if by chance, as you're inking your pieces, it moves on you, you do want to move that back in place so that you can get the next layer positioned perfectly. So I'm just using BetterPress cardstock for this, as well as the BetterPress ink that comes with it. It's a nice permanent ink. You can use many different inks and many different cardstocks with your BetterPress system, and I love that about it. It makes it very versatile, and it means that you can get even more creative. So I do want to ink those butterflies a second time just to make sure they're nice and dark, and I decided to press these sentiments with my butterflies as well. There's a little bit of space around there, so I figured I could get them on that cardstock, and it's always nice to have a little bit more sentiments to choose from. Now, any excess sentiments that I don't use, I put into a Ziploc bag, a tiny Ziploc bag, and I put it back in my packaging. I know that next time I want to use this press plate set, if by chance I have any extra sentiments, I will look at them first to see if some of them are going to work with the project that I was wanting to create. That way I don't have to search somewhere else. I know that if I want to use them, they will be with the actual press plate set. So for my next layer, this is the solid layer. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to ink that butterfly when it's not in place. I'm going to move it in place with my fingers, and then I'm going to clean off that acetate. That way I can make sure that I don't have any ink right around where that press plate is supposed to be placed. To me, it's much easier to clean it off on the side of my little acetate piece and move that press plate in place, especially when there's smaller press plates, because sometimes they will move as you're inking them. They suction onto ink pads and make it a little bit harder to stay in place. So I will typically start with them out of place, ink them, and then just use the tips of my fingers on the sides to ink them in place or to move them in place. And here we have some perfect placement for those butterflies. These will be perfect in many different colors. And I didn't do that for this inking, but you could easily do one color in the middle of the butterfly using the same inking technique that I did for the solid pieces for when I was inking those foiled butterflies. I think that would look fantastic as well. Now, for my solid hot foiled pieces here, I wanted the details or the outline parts of those butterflies to be in black, so I just used some black soot distress ink with an ink blending brush. Then I'm using a clean paper towel just to buff all of the excess ink that is sitting on top of that foil off, just to make sure that I don't get any ink on my fingers or smear any ink elsewhere. I left the words and the sentiments white, but you could easily ink them in a different color if you wanted. And here's the 3 different butterflies that we have. So we have the solid hot foil that is inked with interference inks. The foiled, which is inked with interference inks, the solid hot foil that is just inked with some black soot distress ink, and then our BetterPress images that are also inked with interference ink. So I have them all the same colors, but you could easily make them different colors. Typically when I'm creating cards for a video, I like them to kind of coordinate together to a point. So I'll often use similar colors or a similar color scheme. So for this particular card, I'm going to create a triple mat. I have a black piece of cardstock that I trimmed to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches, a white piece that I trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4, and that's this one here that I'm using some opal blush interference ink to ink around it. And then I have my foiled piece for my background, and that is trimmed to 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. That way I have just thin mats all the way around, but they bring in all the different colors for this particular card. Typically when I'm using the interference inks to ink one of my mats, I'll just go direct to pad on the edge of that cardstock on my glass surface. It does tend to waste a fair amount of ink. It also puts a heavier amount around that outside and makes it take a little bit longer to dry, which is why I used my sticky mat and put the cardstock on there and ink blended it on. Probably doesn't use much less ink, but because the ink layer is a little bit thinner, it's going to take a little bit less time to dry. And I knew I was creating a lot of cards here, so I didn't want to be wasting time waiting for things to dry. Once I have all of my layers on, I'm ready to add my sentiments as well as my butterfly. When I typically use butterflies, I will bend those wings at the body so that there's a little bit of extra dimension here. Sometimes I will put some foam pop dots underneath there to support them, hold them in place. Sometimes I won't. It really just depends on what I plan to do with the card. If you want to give it that extra support, foam pop dots are definitely a great way to go. If this gets put into an envelope, it will get flattened, so the foam pop dots will help it not get flattened. I also inked my sentiment and sub-sentiment with that Opal Blush Interference ink to have that coordinate well. The last step I did on that card there was put some stickles on there, and I used some glisten stickles because there was a little bit of gold shimmer to it, and it's going to tie in with the gold accents that I have on that card. I set that aside to dry. Once again, I'll typically show that card right away because I've let it dry for an hour, but again, I knew I was creating a lot of cards, so I just set that aside to dry. You'll see all of them at the end. Some of them I'll pull back in and you'll see them dried, but that just is going to add that extra little bit of sparkle. For my second card here, I'm using that scalloped and stitched edge ovals, and I'm creating some different layers. I'm using both the regular foiled and negative foiled script background. They're going to complement each other really, really nicely. I will typically use the solid hot foiled backgrounds like this for really thin layers because I just don't want them to take up too much space or too much area or too much attention. A little bit is great. To me, too much, it just takes away from that attention. For my mats for the background of this card, I have a black mat here trimmed to 4 inches or 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. I have a white piece that is just 4 1/8 inches. I'm using that Opal Blush ink on top of that black cardstock. So we're going to see the part of the ink that shows up well on black or dark cardstock. And in this case, it's a pink color. I'm also using that same interference ink on that solid hot foiled piece just around the edges because we're only going to see that piece, but it's just going to add a little bit of a different look from the regular foiled piece. This one, the script will be in that Opal Blush color. So they're going to coordinate beautifully with the butterflies, but just a little bit different in different ways. So I'm going to put those 2 layers on the back there, and then I'm ready to add those different oval layers. I'm using Barely Art glue for gluing everything together. I use this for most things, and I have it in a fine line bottle so that I can use it for even tiny die cuts. So when it gets to the point where I'm gluing the wildflowers and the gladiolus together, I use the same glue in those fine bottles so I have some precision with it. For the accent parts of my card, I'm using a couple butterflies, and I'm also using the foiled love piece to create a little bit different and help it pop up off of that script background. I used a little bit of black soot ink on the bottom part, and then I'm going to use that Opal Blush over both areas or over the whole piece. This is going to coordinate with that black inking I did for those butterflies, and it's just going to help them coordinate together so that they coordinate beautifully. Now, this is another one where I use my fingers just to bend the wings of the butterfly to have them pop out a little bit. Just like that last card, if you want to support that, some foam pop dots work great for that. When I glue them down, I only put glue on the body of the butterfly so that I'm not gluing them down flat. I put my acrylic block on there to hold everything in place while it dried, and you can see how it did flatten those butterfly wings, which is exactly why I say if you put this in an envelope, it will go flat, but if you want to support that dimension, foam pop dots will work. I'm using the glisten stickles for some dots on these butterflies as well. This is a step that you could skip if you want, but it just adds a little bit of different texture. It's a different sparkle from the interference inks, and I think it just adds a finishing touch to the butterflies. It's one of those things that because the glisten stickles, it has some gold shimmer to it, but it's not it's not in your face gold. It's very, very subtle, and it's something that you typically wouldn't notice when you first looked at them, but when you tilt it into the light, that's when it catches the light, and it just makes you look at different areas of your card. For my next card, I'm using that script background once again. I'm using it with my die cutting machine with the stacking for embossing a die cut. So I'm going to use this rubber mat that comes with the machine. I have a piece of BetterPress cardstock here. I have my background plate inked with black soot distress ink, and I've just put it on that cardstock. You want to make sure to put it on the cardstock and not move it because we have ink on that background. Then I put the embossing plate on there and run it through the machine. So not only do we have an inked background here, but it's also embossed, so it's got kind of a puffy texture to it. Now I did get a blotch of ink kind of towards the top center that you may notice once I took it out, but I knew I was going to ink this background. So once it gets inked, it's a little bit less obvious, a little bit more subtle. My butterfly is also going to hide that. It's also going to be in front of that, so you're really not going to see that. I'm using that same Opal Blush interference ink to ink that black background. You can see that I am not getting a completely smooth inking here, and I'm doing that on purpose. To me, if I wanted the color to be completely smooth, I would have used colored cardstock. I personally think it looks a little bit more interesting when I'm inking a background if there's some areas that are a little bit lighter, some areas that are a little bit darker. Depending on the look that I'm going for, sometimes I do it evenly, but most of the time I'll do some areas lighter, some darker, because I just think it's a little bit more visually interesting. I have that background that is embossed and inked here, trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I have a mat that I created for that that is trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. To add a little bit of gold to my background, I used the Lisa Horton solid gold ink pad, smushed it on my desk, added a little bit of water to create some splatters. Now those splatters were a little bit too subtle for me, so what I ended up doing was getting the re-inker for that solid gold pad, shaking it up really, really well because the ink does separate, putting that in that watered down ink that I had on my desk and mixing that up just so that there's a little bit more of a gold color. It's a little bit easier to see. On the camera, you actually can't see it, but in real life, it's got some beautiful gold splatters on that background that really catch the light nicely. And because I'm using one of the solid hot foiled butterflies for this, it's going to coordinate beautifully with that butterfly. I'm also using the solid hot foiled Love, but I'm pairing it with some of the regular BetterPress sub-sentiments because the white cardstock with the black ink on there is going to pop on the background a little bit better. So I do like mixing and matching. I like having the same things done with different techniques because they're great to pair together to match and just add a little bit more interest to the background of that card. Once again, I'm going to use the Glisten Stickles just to add dots on the edges of those butterfly wings. Those foiled and BetterPressed butterfly wings already have those dots there, so I'm just following the dots that are actually in the pattern on that plate. And I'm going to set that aside to dry. And here's the one that has already completely dried. You can see when I tilt it in the light, it just catches a little bit of light. It just has that little bit of glitter. This third card here that I made, I glued that butterfly down flat and I just showed you the side profile so you could see how just bending that butterfly wings adds a little bit of extra dimension to it. So now that my butterfly cards are done, I'm ready to start creating some flower cards. So I'm starting with this daisy flower from the Layered Wildflowers die set. I have them die cut out of white cardstock and I'm using some Cloud9 matte blending inks in order to ink them. This way I have some lighter areas and some darker areas, and it just is a little bit more visually interesting. The Cloud9 matte blending inks are a dye and pigment blend, so they have a creaminess to them and they're beautiful for blending with. They're great for blending with. They stay wet for a little while, so they work perfectly for coloring these die cuts. So I used cobblestones on the flower because I wanted it to not be completely stark white. I used garden sage on the greenery, and then I brought back that solid gold ink pad for the center of that daisy just to give it a little bit of metallic shimmer. Gluing those pieces together with that same Barely Art glue that I put the rest of my cards together. Now, typically I will put together my flower heads and not add the stems. For this video, I did it differently. There's some cards that I would prefer to have those flower heads not on there first because it makes it a lot easier to shorten stems if you need to. There's one particular one that I find the stem is a little bit too long, but it's already together. So sometimes you have cards that you think about afterwards and wish you'd done something just a little bit different. For the background for this card, I'm going to use that one of those splatter plates, and I'm using it with the Opal Blush Interference ink with BetterPress cardstock. All the BetterPress cardstock that I'm using in this video is porcelain, so it's the lightest color. This way, when I ink it, it's also going to press down into that cardstock and have that letterpress effect to it as well. Because interference inks are water reactive, that makes it really, really easy to clean that off of BetterPress plates. I have a microfiber cloth that I keep damp when I'm creating, and I just use that to clean it off nicely. I used my solid hot foiled script piece to create a outer mat for this particular piece. So that is trimmed to 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inch. My BetterPress splattered piece is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm going to use one of the sentiment stamps and die sets. I wasn't paying attention. I was talking to know exactly which one I used for this particular one. Now, one thing that I like to do anytime I'm using a clear stamp is using a white eraser and just rubbing that on the stamping surface and then using a brush to clean it off. I just kind of simulated that for this video because I've already used this set before, so I know I've done it once, so I don't need to do it again. It's one of those things that you only need to do that the first time you use the stamp set. Once it's done, it's done. It's just going to help take off any possible manufacturing residue and help stamps to take ink just a little bit better. So anytime I open up a clear stamp, if I'm going to use one stamp, I just do the entire set so that I know that that whole set has been completely done. I don't do it for individual stamps as I'm using it from a set. Easiest to just do it all one time. For this particular card, I'm going to use these sub-sentiments. I inked them with Versamark ink, putting some embossing powder tool on my cardstock first, just to make sure that that embossing powder was really only going to stick to the ink and not anything else that's on that cardstock. Poured on some gold embossing powder, and now I'm using my embossing tool to melt that powder. So this is going to tie in with the different gold elements or accents that we have with the cards that I'm creating. You could easily just use regular ink. I could also use that solid gold ink pad. However, I do find that that solid gold ink pad is great for creating splatters. It's great for ink blending. I don't personally love it as much for stamping sentiments because it is a foam pad. It's really quite soft. It's hard to get the ink just on the top surface. So I find that I kind of over ink the stamp. I prefer to use Versamark ink and emboss my sentiments rather than using that particular pad for stamping sentiments. So here's a background that I used, or a solid hot foiled background that I created a long time ago. And this is one of the things that I like to use it with. I like to die cut different pieces out of those pieces. Sometimes when I solid hot foil, it's to create a background with it or to create a mat around the background. Sometimes it's just to create some specialty cardstock that I will use to die cut either a sentiment in this case or some accent pieces for different die cuts. Like for instance, around Christmas time, I will often use pieces like this for tiny little ornaments for tree die cuts or something like that. So I use them a lot. This is a great way to use up those solid hot foiled pieces if they just are something that you're never going to use as is on a card. This way they're not going to waste in any way. So here's that solid hot foiled script piece. It's going to be perfect around the outside of my splattered BetterPress piece. And yes, I have the piece that was die cut out of the center for one of my last cards, but you're never going to know that behind this splatter piece there is a hole from a die cut. No one's ever going to know. It's a great way to stretch your cardstock just a little bit more and get more than one thing out of it. So this particular solid hot foil piece, I got 2 different cards out of it. You'll see as we progress through this video, the foiled script piece, I end up being able to use that for 3 different cards. So it's great to be able to stretch them and get creative with it. So with those base pieces on my card, I can glue down my flower as well as my sentiment and sub-sentiment. And the last step here, I just use a little bit of that glisten stickles on the raised area from that flower center, just to give it a little bit of sparkle, a little bit of a different texture from that solid gold ink blended piece. So for this particular card, here's where I'm using the script foiled background for a second piece for a card. So I already have that oval that I had die cut out of there for one of my other ones. I'm just using the scalloped oval and creating a scallop around there. My splattered solid piece there is already die cut from one of the ovals, so it works perfectly with that background. For this particular flower, this one is kind of like a poppy, and I'm using some rhubarb jam matte blending ink to ink blend the flower, concentrating on the center and then working my way out. So I have the darker area on the flower center, and as I go out, it gets a little bit lighter. Again, it just creates a little bit of visual dimension. For the shadow for my sentiment, I'm using that same ink pad and ink blending all the way around that piece there. Now, this particular ink pad is fairly dry, so I don't have a lot of ink on there. So I do have to work a little bit in order to ink blend it. I just got a refill for that pad, but I didn't want to refill it right as I was making this video and have too much ink on that pad. I would rather have a drier pad than a wetter pad so that I have a little bit more control. So I'm also going to take that scallop oval die cut piece with that foiled script, and I'm going to ink blend that rhubarb jam around that as well, so that coordinates beautifully with that flower. So you can see when I ink blend it, I get a little bit of extra ink around the outside edges. It just kind of frames it a little bit better. It's one of the differences between using colored cardstocks and ink blending. It just has a completely different look to it. Some places using solid cardstock works better, and I will create some gladiolas at the end of this video where I'm using some solid cardstock, but sometimes just ink blending, it just creates a completely different look. So if you're getting bored with doing solid cardstock, ink blend your cardstock. It just gives you more creative opportunities, shall we say. So I'm going to glue down that scallop oval on my card base. Then I'm gluing down my solid hot foiled splatters. And while those are drying, I'm ready to put my card together here. Or sorry, my flower together here. They're very, very easy to layer together. Of this collection, the hardest one to layer together is the layered gladiolas, only because there's a lot of pieces. But what I often do is I will have the cover of that die set sitting to my side so I can look at it to make sure that I'm putting the pieces in the right place. And once you do it a few times, you kind of get to know which pieces go together for which flowers. So as I'm gluing my flowers together, I'm also gluing together my sending for my main sentiment. And here's where I like to typically have a flower head not on the stem. So then I can use my scissors, I can cut that short, and then the cut piece is going to be behind the flower head and not at the bottom of the stem. Really, it's probably just a personal preference thing. If you don't mind having a cut edge visible, you can always cut the bottom of the flower. Personally, I just, if I'm using die cuts, I don't like to have a cut edge from my scissors visible, if at all possible. Again, just a personal preference thing. So once I have my flower glued down, and I kind of center that where the splatters are, I want to have that kind of framing the flower head. I'm ready to put down my sentiment as well as the sub-sentiments. And once again, I'm going to use those glisten stickles for the flower centers. This particular flower has some ovals that have some little spikes on that. I only put dots of it right where those spikes are. Again, I'm not trying to overpower the center of that flower. I'm just adding something for a different texture just to catch the light. This particular flower here, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a thistle, but I looked at it and to me it looked a little bit like a bachelor button. So I'm going to use it with the opal blush interference ink to create a blue flower. I want to play with the properties from that interference ink, so I use some black soot ink with an ink blending brush, a detailed ink blending brush, to ink blend some of the areas first before using the opal blush on there. For the base of the flower, these two pieces here, I'm using the Cobblestones matte blending ink, and then I'm once again using the Garden Sage ink for the flowers as well, sorry, not the flowers, for the stem as well as the leaves. And I ended up having one leaf that got stuck to my arm while I was ink blending something else, so I had to search for that just a little bit. Once those pieces are all ink blended, I can take them off that sticky mat, put it to the side. And anytime I use my sticky mat for ink blending, I use that damp microfiber cloth to clean it right off so that I know when I'm pulling it back out again, I don't have any remaining ink on there. I have a clean mat, so I know I'm not going to pick up any ink that I was using before. Just a good habit to get in. So I glued the layers for that oval piece there. For this particular flower, I put it a little bit raised so it could be the base of the flower as well as the center of the flower, just to create a bit of a different look to it. Then I glued the second piece on top of that. This is the flower where I glued the stem onto the flower, but this particular stem is really quite tall. And once the card was completely done and my glue had already dried, I looked at it again and I wish I had put my flower head just a little bit lower so that it wasn't quite so high on the card. But these are one of those things that either it's hindsight or it's just personal criticism. So just like my first sentiments or sub-sentiments where I stamped, I am once again using the Misty stamping tool. This time I'm just going to use some Hickory Smoke Distress ink and stamp those sub-sentiments. I will stamp them multiple times to make sure that I have some nice, crisp, clear, complete sentiments there. And I love that about the Misty, that you can stamp them a couple times just to make sure that they're completely stamped. Because that stamp and that paper are not moving anywhere, you know that you don't have to worry about positioning it perfectly because it already is. Once that is stamped, I can clean that stamp off, put all those away, and I'm ready to die cut those sentiments. Anytime I die cut those sub-sentiments, I use that Best Ever Craft tape to position, once the die is positioned, to tape that die down. I always want to make sure that when I'm die cutting sentiments or something, that it really matters with the positioning with the die. If it's taped in place, I know that it's not going to move on me. And now I have a bunch of these sub-sentiments that I'm ready to use and ready to set aside for my cards. For the shadow for this one, I'm going to use that same Cobblestones matte blending ink to ink blend that shadow. And then I'm using the Opal Blush to ink blend the upper part of that sentiment. So for the background for this, I'm using one of the Splatters BetterPress plates, but I'm using the one that I haven't used yet. I want my splatter to be bigger than this particular plate. So what I first do is I position it where I want the center of my little splatter cluster to be. Then I ink it with that Hickory Smoke Distress ink, put the clear plate onto my base, run it through my Platinum 6 machine. Now I'm going to take that plate, move it a little bit higher, and then I'm also going to twist it because I don't necessarily want my plate to be positioned exactly the same way as I'm moving this around. I want the splatters to be a little bit different. I do keep it vertical, like, so I'll twist it, but it'll be, I don't know if this really actually makes sense. It'll be, because you can see that particular splatter pattern is kind of an oval. So I don't ever position that oval so it is horizontal. I always position it so it's vertical because I want my cluster to kind of be an oval still once I'm completely done with it. So after doing the upper one, I position it lower, ink it, put the clear plate onto my base, once again, put it through my Platinum 6 machine. So I just repeat this same process until I get a cluster that I'm happy with, that is big enough. Now, as I'm doing that, you can see that I am sometimes leaving the position the same. Sometimes I will spin it around to make sure that it is changed. And once again, not repeating that same cluster over and over again. Now, the one thing that I didn't do for this particular cluster that I considered, but I opted not to, is taking my ink blending brush with the pad and just doing a little bit of ink blending in the center to create a little bit more solid center part to my splatter. I opted not to because I really quite liked the way that it looked and the openness of it. I liked kind of the, the lighter parts in there, but that is another option. If you want the center of your splatter to be a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, you could take an ink blending brush and you could ink blend the center of it to make it a little bit more solid. So for this one, I'm doing, once again, another mat where it is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. My splattered piece here is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending around the outside part of my mat. Again, you could easily just use the pad right to the paper, but it is going to take just a little bit longer to dry. I can glue that to my card base and then glue my splattered piece onto the card base. Now, I did my splattered piece just as gray because I wanted my flower to pop off there and I wanted it to be something neutral. But you could easily do it as a different color as well. Another thing that I thought after the fact would be great is to do the gray and then do some of the silver pad. So Lisa Horton's metallic pads, they came in a trio. They're solid gold, copper pot, and silver shine. Silver would be great right over top of the Hickory Smoke splatters. Doing a few pressings with that press plate in the silver, I think, would be a great complement. And that was the flower where I thought it was just a little bit too high. After looking at it afterwards, I wish I had done it just a little bit lower, but that's okay. So now we're ready to do some gladiolas. Once again, I have them die cut from white cardstock, and I'm going to use some Hickory Smoke Distress ink with a detailed ink blending brush just to create some shadows on those die cuts. I have 3 different interference inks that I'm using for this. I'm going to use some Fruit Salad for the main flowers. I'm using Summer Garden for my greenery, and I'm using Sweet Treat for the yellow little stamen things for the inside of the flowers. So for my main flowers, that's where I'm using that hickory smoke. I'm putting a little bit of that hickory smoke towards the center flower or the base of the flower. There are a few die cuts where I don't do any shading at all for the buds, as well as there's a few little petal layers that I don't do any shading to that as well. They're such tiny pieces that I figured if I did any shading, it was really going to cover the entire piece. And because some of the pieces are so tiny, I didn't really think that shading was absolutely necessary. I did do a little bit of that hickory smoke shading for the greenery and for my leaves. I put a little bit of shading towards the base of the leaves, the base of the stem, and then at the top of the stems, right where those stems would be right below the buds or the flowers. Some of it is going to be covered with the flowers so you don't actually see it, but I typically will do these things anyways so that I have some shading on there, and if it's visible, you'll see it. So as I took my pieces off my mat, I looked at the die cut package, placed the pieces or the flower pieces that went together in order to easily assemble them. And they're really quite easy to assemble once you figure out which pieces go with which flower. Now, the one thing to note here is when I was doing my die cutting, I just die cut one of everything. I wasn't necessarily paying attention to the flowers on the front of the package and how many different pieces I was going to need. Now, in the end, the flower pieces, other than the buds, need to be die cut twice in order to have enough flowers to completely fill the gladiolus stem. So I am doing one of each flower here on screen. I do the second of each of those flowers off screen, so you don't have to rewatch the repeat of exactly the same thing. It's one of those things that it's super easy to do once you know that, but I hadn't realized that as I was putting them together. And again, using liquid glue here makes it really, really easy to assemble and layer things together because you can put a little bit of that liquid glue. It gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. So once those are in place, I will give them a few moments for that glue to start setting and drying, and then I will assemble or will add those flowers to the stems of the gladiolas. So I start with those buds, and this is where I realized that doing those flowers only created 3 flowers, and on the front of the packaging, the stem has 6 of them. So by doing each one of these pieces twice, you will have enough flowers. So off screen, I inked and assembled those flowers, and I'm ready to just add them to the base here. Again, they're really, really easy to assemble. They're also really easy to add to the base of the stem because those stems have kind of circles or areas. It basically shows you exactly where those flowers get placed. And then we have this gorgeous stem for the focal point of my card. Now here's where I'm taking that script foiled piece and I'm going to create one more layer with it. Typically, I will often do 2 layers or 2 pieces with a piece. This is the first time I've actually gotten 3 out of it, and it was kind of one of those personal challenges. I wanted to see if I could. So I end up trimming this to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And then I take a piece of white Hammermill cardstock and trim that to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. It's going to create a mat that goes outside around this piece. And you're also going to see the scallop layer in there as well. So it's kind of doing dual duty. Once again, it's a personal challenge. Sometimes it's fun to see how much you can do with something. So with that outer mat, I'm using the Fruit Salad interference ink to ink blend towards the center. I'm doing more ink blending than I normally would do for a mat because I know I'm going to see a little bit on the inside of that scallop. So that's why I go a little bit farther in. I also did my shadow for my sentiment with that same Fruit Salad interference ink. I have a couple ovals here that I die cut off screen. I'm going to use the Summer Garden interference ink for one of these ovals to give that a green mat to tie in with the greenery from my flowers. For this particular one, I don't need to go in as far as I went for that fruit salad one, but I do want to make sure that I have enough of it covered so that my oval that goes over top of it is going to completely cover any of that white area. So now I'm ready to layer my pieces to my card together. First, starting with my larger mat that has that fruit salad interference ink. Now we can do this foiled kind of scalloped oval frame here, centering that in nicely. Now, when I was trimming this down, I was trying to keep the mats around that scallop as even as possible. I think if they were measured, they probably wouldn't be completely and totally even, but because it's a scalloped edge on there, I think it's a little bit more forgiving. Then I glued down that Summer Garden inked one, and then our white one. Now the white one is a perfect background for the gladiolas. I wanted to make sure that they're going to pop off a nice crisp background. So this is the perfect background for that. And once that flower is done and on there, I'm ready to glue on the leaves. So when I inked them, I inked a little bit of that hickory smoke towards the base. So I'm making sure that that base, or the areas that the hickory smoke was on there, it's a little bit darker. I'm making sure that is at the base of the gladiolas. I want to make sure that I don't have that at the tip of my leaves. Then I'm ready to put on that Wishes die cut and shadow. I typically will put the sentiment on top of the shadow first before adding it to the card. Makes it a lot easier on the card to me. This way as well, I can put the whole piece and position it where I think I'm going to put it. And then if I change my mind, it's really easy to change. If I were to put the shadow on first and then put the upper layer on and then decide it wasn't quite the right placing, it's a little bit harder once it's already glued on there, obviously. Here is that finished card with all of those beautiful shimmery colors. Now this is the last card here, and this is the one where I use some solid cardstock. So I have my flower pieces die cut out of Blush, Dahlia, and Wildberry cardstock. They all coordinate beautifully together, and I'm using that fruit salad interference ink to just do a tiny little bit of ink blending with a detailed ink blending brush towards the center or the base of the flower. So I'm doing my inking for this very similar to how I did the hickory smoke on the last card. I'm just doing this onto colored cardstock, so it's going to give it a little bit of an interference shimmer to it. So I did that, and then I did the rest of my flower assembly off screen. It's the same flower assembly as my last card. This is the point where I was realizing exactly how long this video was going to be, and I didn't want it to be too much longer. So I did that assembly off screen. So I wanted to share how I'm doing the background for this. Because I'm creating 3 different stems of these gladiolas, I wanted to do splatters in my background, but I wanted them to be a little bit bigger than just one particular splatter. So I chose the larger of the splatters in that Splatter BetterPress plate set, and I'm doing it a few times with some of that Opal Blush interference ink on BetterPress cardstock on that background. This way I have a larger area that has that splatter on there. The gladiolas are going to cover some of that splattered area, but we're going to see a little bit of that around the edges. And then once again, these inks are really, really easy to get off the BetterPress plates, and I will typically clean them off right after I've been using them. That way I know next time I go use them, they're likely completely clean. I don't have to worry about ink residue on them. So for this particular card, I chose the Wishes, Shadow, and Sentiment. And for the shadow, I used that Opal Blush. For the upper layer, I ended up using Fruit Salad and Sweet Treat. I end up not liking this, but I did want to keep this into the video and share with you how I changed it and ended up liking it a lot better. For the mats for this particular card, I already had a piece of Dahlia cardstock that was trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So my splatter piece, I trimmed that to 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. I want the darkest of my gladiola stems to be in the center of my card, so I just placed it there, not glued down, and then I can glue my other pieces behind where that is going to go. But by having that in place, it makes it a lot easier to know exactly where and how I should position those flowers. So I glued those into place. Then I'm ready to glue the darkest one in the center, and I do raise it a little bit higher than the other two. Just a personal preference. I like it when one is a little bit higher and the ones in the background are just a tiny little bit lower. Then I'm ready to glue on the stems and leaves. Now, what I should have done here is I should have put those two towards the back, glued those stems and leaves on first, then put that one in the center, and then put the stems and leaves on this one, so that some of these stems and leaves went behind the center one in the middle. I didn't really think about it at the time until I was busy gluing these leaves on, and then I was realizing that I should have done it in a little bit of a different order. Left it on. I didn't want to pull that center one up just at the off chance that I was going to rip something that I didn't want to rip. So I just put the stems and the leaves on all in front of everything. But again, better to not put that center one down first, do the leaves for those two outer ones, then put the center one down. A little bit more of a natural look that way. So once I have all of those leaves done, I'm ready to add that wishing die cut. So I glue that on there, and I also put one of the sub-sentiments down, and that's when I was looking at it. Now, even though both the sweet treat and that fruit salad, the two colors from that wishing, are on those flowers, it just, to me, it looked more like tropical fish than it did floral. So what I end up doing is I took some blush cardstock, die cut that wishes word out of it, used some of that fruit salad interference ink on the bottom for a little bit of an ombre look so it coordinates well with that lighter of the flowers. And then just glued that right over top of the one that I didn't like. And because it's positioned the exact same way, you don't even see that there is a die cut underneath there. Unless you look to the side, then you can see it had a little bit more dimension. But I like this look a lot better. It coordinates with the card a lot better. So if by chance you do something similar, it's a really, really easy thing to fix. So here is the Gladiola card with the solid cardstock done. A little bit of interference inks on that solid cardstock to give it a little bit of a shimmer. Then we have the one that is the single stem with just white cardstock that we use the hickory smoke and the interference inks to add that shimmer to those flowers. And then a bunch of different layers for that particular flower as well as the surrounding pieces. Then we have our little cone flower, blue flower, bachelor button. Sorry, my mind went completely blank on the flower. And then we have our beautiful poppy with that negative foiled splatter on the background. And you can see how there's a lot of foil there. It does catch the light, but I think because of that white splatter in there, it's not too much. And then we have our daisy with the blue splatter in the background. A little bit of that negative foiled script around the outside to add a little bit of that gold shimmer. And now we have some of our butterfly cards. And I think this butterfly silhouettes registration press plate might be my new favorite. It was so much fun to create with. We have that script embossed background with those solid hot foiled pieces. Very, very simple card, but the shine from that foil as well as the interference inks just take it to the next level. Then we have our foiled butterflies with those interference ink, plus the script background in the center as well as the sentiments and sub-sentiments. And then our first card here with the BetterPress butterfly with interference inks, the foil splattered background. And that foil just catches that light absolutely beautifully, and it's a really nice complement to the different press plates and die cuts. Thank you so much for joining me today, and apologize if this video was too long for you. I typically don't like to create them quite this long, but I really wanted to get all of these different things within that same video, and I was just so excited to create with this collection. Have a fantastic day. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me.